council. They said they use it to enforce the code of conduct.
Ah.
I like it.
So Paul, where are you?
That is Douro Valley in Portugal.
Oh, nice.
Trip a couple years ago. That was actually the view from where my patio we were staying on.
Wow.
Nice.
Spot. Beautiful.
Is that a Portuguese Vinho Verde in the bottle there? That's one of my favorite wines.
It is probably a Vinho Verde, yes.
Yeah.
Nice
This
and
is the time of year for that.
When it gets warm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You had a bottle last week. They love. So that's the Douro Valley, right?
yeah, that actually might be a red, to be honest with you. We had pretty much gotten through all the Vinho Verdes at that point. We're up in the. This is in the Porto region, so you get a little more into the reds.
It's a beautiful area.
It was spectacular.
Portugal's fantastic.
Oh yeah.
I don't have any wine bottles to share.
Where are you going? Oh, Ray, yeah. Look at this view.
I'm at Westport. I have a long history here, and we designed a bunch of houses back before the recession, and I still come and visit one of them every year or two. So
Nice.
yeah, it's nice. A rare sunny day. Yeah.
I just want to ask, we have a call-in listener who's in as an observer of the meeting right now. If that person is Shonda, press *9 on your phone so we can know it's you and add you in. If not, welcome. And we're glad that you're here, whoever you are, mystery listener. Oh, I think that's Shonda. It's me. Hi,
Allison,
Shonda.
Laura's
Welcome.
having trouble getting in, so I'm working with her.
Okay, great. Shonda, you're in, and I'll just let you mute yourself from here on out. Okay. Cool.
Probably make sure everybody else is connecting all right and get going. We got a lot to cover tonight. It is 5:30. I got 5:32. So how's that? Anybody having connectivity issues? Cameras working, microphones working?
Yeah.
All right. Good. It's old hat. It's old hat by now, really. Although I've been having trouble with my earphones this week, so I've got a backup pair in case they go out tonight.
Well, good luck. I'm gonna have to jump into another call, but I took it to hear from you, and I'm sorry.
Is that Laura?
I'm guessing it was Rose because she lit up.
Oh,
It sounded like her voice.
all right.
Well, let's start off with the roll call, and then we'll get the party started. How's that? Get that little task out of the way. Ron Campbell.
Here.
Mark Elliott.
Present, thank you.
All right. Dennis Hickey.
Good evening.
Good evening, Dennis. Kim Parman.
Here.
Rose Ojeda.
Here.
Hi, Rose.
Hi.
Anna Hosley.
No Anna yet.
No Anna yet. Okay. Michael Schmier.
Present.
It says Michael. I'd call you Mike. Christy Switzer.
Christy is out of town.
Okay. Thanks. Michael Newgard.
He's working with the National Guard.
That's right. Grover Bornefeld.
I'm here.
Excellent. Jan Lindstrom.
No Jan yet.
No Jan yet. Doug Jones is here. Shonda Wild.
Yes, I'm here.
Paul Boundy.
Here.
And Gary Bukowski. We know you're here, Gary. Yeah.
And looks like we had Anna join us as well. Anna's in the room. Hi.
Hello. Well, Anna, you missed roll call, but we know you're here. Jan, it looks like Jan is showing up as well. So good, a full team.
Yeah.
So yeah, lots to get covered this evening. The meeting will be recorded, so you can review it if you feel like you missed anything. So just watch for that if you're wondering what exactly happened. Tonight's basically a workshop talking about the evaluation process, well, not the process, but the actual evaluation of this R7 design alternatives. We've got to make sure we all understand the evaluation, see where we're in agreement, and then end up ultimately selecting 3 alternatives that we can offer to the public. Important thing to note is the 3 alternatives might not be our favorites, but what we're trying to be able to do is offer the public 3 options, 3 that really represent the possible choices that we think are viable. So we'll make a recommendation on those, and then once we get public input, we'll of course take that into consideration and come up with a final selection to pass on. So this is just kind of the first step as we get going, and lots of feedback and input till we can kind of fine tune things. Did you get the? Hopefully you all got the meeting summary and review for our last meetings. I don't know if there's any changes to that, any corrections, that sort of thing.
Oh, there were no meeting
There were
notes.
no. Oh, there were no. I saw that.
Yeah, sorry, Doug.
Okay.
Your project manager is way behind.
Way behind. Well, you're here, so that's good, Catherine. That's the main thing. I think we're all there. We were all there. You can review the video if you want to, but for the record, we'll get that. We'll get to that eventually.
Catherine, if you need some help with that, I'll help you.
I might take you up on that.
Oh
Yeah,
boy,
give me a call. I'm happy to do that.
what a guy, Dennis. Good job.
I've done it before.
Okay, so before we go further, we talked about all the task force members that are here, but want to make sure we acknowledge everybody else who's in the room. Catherine, you want to introduce your team?
Yeah, I think I've got everybody. Let's see. We've got Scott Archer's here, NCPRD. I think I see Laura got in okay after a little trouble. Amber Johnson, of course, is helping us with everything here, Zoom oriented, and also many other things with our public and government affairs. It looks like Ellen Rogalin is on the line, but she's not showing her face. Some people have asked about you, Ellen, because you come on at the very end of the meeting and people have asked who you are. So there you are. She just showed up there. Mitzi Olson is here from the library. And then I see we have Candy Ho is back. Tracy Grambush is here, and I think they're here mostly to observe tonight. So, and then myself, I'm Catherine Krieger, project manager for the county.
All right, great. And then Jennifer, do you want to talk about your team?
Sure. I'm here, project manager with OPSIS, Jim Cavillage with OPSIS, Ray Johnston with Johnston Architects, Ken Ballard, recreation with Ballard King, and then Kurt Lango with Lango Hansen Landscape Architects. So we're all here tonight too.
All right, great, thanks. And then once again, we also do have Commissioner Paul Savas here witnessing, watching, observing. So we're glad to have him as he has been through most of the meetings leading up to this. Commissioner Savas, I don't know if you have anything you want to add at this point, or if you want to wait till towards the end.
Yeah, I'll wait towards the end. Thank you, Doug.
Sure, yeah, you bet. Thanks. All right, Allison, I think the ball's in your court.
Cool. Well, I was wondering if, Catherine, do you have any updates? I know we've had a busy week since, well, has it been a week? It has been a week since we last met. You all have had an opportunity to do a survey, which we had a similar meeting with the Gladstone folks, and they helped remind us that this is a difficult task, that evaluating against these criteria can be sometimes challenging, and you also have the additional complexity of having 7 design alternatives to review. So thank you so much for those folks who did that. But I know, Catherine, you've also been having some conversations with folks, and I'm wondering if there's any sort of project updates that we want to touch on before we go into looking at the evaluation of the design alternatives.
Not specifically. I had a nice conversation with Gary about his questions. We spoke, was that yesterday, Gary? And some of them have to do with, most of them have to do with geotech and seismic. And we do have a geotech on our team, which the county has hired separate from the design team. That's usually the way it works. And we do have allotted in a contract we're almost done with some time for the geotech to come talk to us about the Oakfield Fault and any more geological issues that Gary might want to talk about, and maybe others. Maybe it could be a separate meeting or a phone call or something like that. Depends on who's interested. So that was the main thing. I did offer others to call. I think that was the only other call that I got this past week from folks.
Catherine, I want to thank you for pointing me and the link for the preliminary report from the geotechnical study. It's on the website, as you pointed out, under documents. So if anybody wants to see it, it's interesting reading.
Yeah. Are there any other? Oh, it looks like Scott made it. Sorry. So I think that's it for me, and then I'll do an update at the end of the meeting.
Okay, great. Looks like we do have a hand from Grover. So before we dive on in, Grover, go right ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious. There was a handout that came out 2 days ago, and in that handout, it doesn't clarify other than that information floated around or whatever. But and in it had several questions that I had that affect my choices or realities, etc. And one of them was about the parking, and I had sent that, and I still haven't heard back whether the answer of it's $70,000 a parking space still holds for the 2 examples that I showed, because I can't imagine in downtown Milwaukee or downtown, they're not even in downtown, on the fringe of downtown Milwaukee and the fringe of downtown Oregon City, there's 2 examples, and I just like to know whether that is in fact that kind of expense or not to do those kinds of designs.
Yeah, so let me just address that 2 things. One is everybody saw how many questions there were from everybody. So we really appreciate your interest, and we're happy to take questions offline. You know, Grover, be happy to meet with you and go through your questions one by one. In terms of the parking questions, I know you've asked that before, and I think Jennifer is going to help us with that tonight. And hopefully that will help answer the question. So Jennifer, can you
Sure. Yeah.
address that?
Yeah, and I know we touched on it briefly last time, Grover, and based on the time we had, it wasn't probably as complete of an answer as you would have liked to have. You know, the kind of parking to have under another floor, there's additional cost to that, and there is a range that we can generally take for that, and it can vary. We did not specifically have a cost estimate of a designed parking layout to inform that, but we can take some assumptions, some general assumptions to that. Just kind of knowing the square footage of the freestanding library of 17,700, you could probably get about 45 spaces in there potentially, but you'd also have to accommodate vertical circulation, which would be an elevator, which would be stairs. You'd have to accommodate mechanical system, fireproofing, sprinklers, that kind of thing, because it would then be a space that's occupied by people. I think we touched on that a little bit last time. But if you were looking at those kind of things, we would probably be increasing our cost for the new building cost per square foot by probably about $100 to $140 a square foot more to do that. You know, just looking at that generally, that could be a range of, you know, between maybe 1.8 to maybe 2.5 additional to put parking under the building for the freestanding options. So we haven't taken it to a level beyond some assumptions right now, but I don't know if that can maybe helps you understand a little bit more of the cost increase. The other thing that we would take into account with that is that we would have a taller building because we'd have to have mechanical accommodated on the roof of those buildings, which we had assumed we would be putting in that space underneath the existing or underneath a new library. We would also have to deal with the historic impact of what that means, because we'd have to do some screening requirements for that. And then, you know, if we could have, you know, 45 spaces to accommodate, that would not be able to get rid of an additional parking lot in the freestanding option. It would reduce the number of spaces, but we wouldn't be able to completely reduce it. So we didn't take it farther than that, but does that help answer your question to some degree?
Just wanted to clarify the two examples that I sent with pictures specifically of real buildings that are not in high cost per square foot. Those people paid that kind of extra money to have that parking on the main floor?
I don't know what they paid for theirs. I mean, there's a cost that's borne in all kinds of things, you know, more structure, more foundation, you know, occupied space, vertical circulation. It's doing another floor. You're just not having to pay what you'd be paying for the library floor.
Right, but it
So
does take up an acre or so of parkland is the issue that I'm also trying to, so it isn't just cost, it's losing parkland.
Right.
And other alternatives.
It's a trade. Yeah, it's a trade-off. That's right.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, thanks, Jennifer. I think generally what we felt about it was that after you asked the question that, you know, the cost of the library, the freestanding library is already, you know, $3 million more. So we felt like we really didn't want to add additional cost. As Laura and Scott mentioned last week, you know, the sky is not the limit. We do have to be efficient, and really didn't feel like that was an appropriate cost for us to engage in, at least at this time, unless there's some really unknown funders out there for the project. So we still feel like we've got really good options to take a look at, and we're excited to do that tonight and narrow it down to 3.
Okay, I'm going to take that as my cue to.
That was your cue, yeah. Yeah.
But it does sound like that the door is very much open for folks to continue to have one-on-one conversations with Catherine.
You bet.
And get some more detailed responses. Mark, I see your question in the chat about asking if OPSIS can review the breakdown of costs. I think as we get into our discussion, I know Jennifer has some slides kind of at the ready if they're helpful to illustrate our discussion. So when we get there, I think she can certainly bring that up. She's nodding her head, so yeah. I think I'm going to assume that that's good to go. So as needed, ask for the information that you need if you need a refresher. So as Doug mentioned, our goal tonight is sort of twofold. One is to hear just your thoughts and your opinions. You know, what do you like? We have 7 design alternatives in front of us. What's really appealing to you and why? The big objective for this evening too is to narrow down the 7 alternatives to 3 alternatives that could be taken out to the public for additional input. If we have time, and I'm hoping we will, because our next meeting will really be devoted to reviewing the public, what we're calling the virtual open house, but we'll also have a survey component in it and talking about our next round of outreach. So how do we engage the voices that are not present on this task force, go out to the wider community and get their thoughts on all the alternatives. So we really want to be sure that we are giving the community a range of options that sort of illustrate the differences. You know, originally we were talking about 3 different kinds of alternatives. The design team came up with 7 because they're overachievers. And just because it gave more to illustrate, you know, there's some real puzzles in this process that they were able to illustrate through different design alternatives. So we want to be sure that we're going out to the public with a range that will be representative, but that we're not putting out something that you all completely hate and would never support. So it's kind of striking that balance between what do you think, you know, the community should see and weigh in on, and also what's really feasible. You know, if there's something that you think there's no way that this is ever going to be the option that we select, probably not the best option to take out to the community. So I have a couple PowerPoint slides I'm going to apologize in advance because the numbers are really small, but I'm going to just walk you through the results of your evaluation survey. Then I'm going to take away the PowerPoint and we're going to just talk through this. So I'd love to hear from everyone, and we'll think about how we frame this conversation, but really kind of hearing your thoughts and opinions. We haven't had an opportunity to share that. We started to get into that good stuff in the last meeting, but now let's dive in and then talk about that narrowing process. So what are the 3 that you feel would be good to take out to community? So without further ado, also just an FYI, I'm going to share my screen. I can't see when you're raising your hand. So I'm going to talk for a minute, and then when I stop sharing my screen, I can see y'all again. So, share. Okay. So can you see the PowerPoint slide? Yep. Okay, great. So you were asked to evaluate the 7 alternatives in a red, yellow, green. And just to refresh your memory, green indicated that you felt that it met the criteria. Yellow was that you felt it met some of the criteria, and red that you felt it met very little or none of the criteria in the statement. And I also am just going to preface this by saying I know that these statements are quite vague, so this is a challenge, but we have some interesting results through this when we go through the data. So that first criteria statement was really looking at the welcoming and inclusive community heart. So our civic and community gathering spaces, will this continue to be something that functions for this community in the future? And here we start to see that option 2 really emerged as the front runner. I'm going to give you a little bit of a spoiler alert. This is true for all criteria statements. Really, option 2 gains the most green votes in almost all of the, in fact, I think all of the criteria statements. But we start to see some other interesting patterns. So in this statement, a lot of you felt that 1B was kind of also met quite a few of those criteria, whereas 5A and 5B got quite a few red votes. And that is another kind of spoiler alert. It's not true for all criteria, but generally 5A and 5B tended to rank the lowest. So you can start to see that there's this breakdown here in this criteria. 3 and 4, they're kind of in the middle. And 1A and 1B both have more green votes. When we move to the next one about multiple functions and community needs, that was about the balance for all the different functions that we're hoping to have on the site and need to have on the site between the library, the community center, and the park space. Again, you can see option 2 got 11 green votes. There was 1 yellow, one vote for other, and we want to get into those when we discuss with you. But again, option 2 was the front runner. 1B came in second place with 4 green votes and a fair few yellow votes, but also a couple reds. And then 5A and 5B. 5A in particular, most people who responded to this question felt that it just did not meet that criteria or did not meet as many of those functions that were in that criteria statement. When it came to library activities, we had a little bit of a clearer story. 2 came out on top, followed closely by 1B, and then 1A. 4 in this case was the one that got the most red votes. So in terms of the function of the library, this was one where 4 kind of came out with the most reds. But again, 2 people felt that it did meet those criteria, and 2 felt that it met some of them. So we have kind of a range of votes here, but you can see 4, 5A and 5B performed the lowest based on the evaluation of the 13 people who took the survey. When we get to Rec Center, again, we have that option 2 coming out on top and 5A and 5B kind of garnering the most red votes. 1A and 1B are both very close. In fact, they're tied in how folks evaluated them when it came to community center and recreation. And 3 and 4 fared a little bit lower, mostly kind of landing in the middle with quite a few reds as well. This was a really interesting one when it came to history, and we've had a lot of conversations about the historic features of the property. We see 2 coming out on top, but we also see that generally a lot of them performed okay. This is one where every single design alternative got at least a couple of green votes. So about that preservation and reflecting the history of the current and former buildings on the site and while meeting the needs, it seems like there were folks who felt like all of the designs kind of met some of those criteria. You do see that 1A and 3 get quite a few quite a few green votes as well. And then 1B, 4, and 5 sort of end up in the middle. When we came to access, we had a little bit of a similar story where 2 came out on top. We had 1B and 3 getting quite a few green votes, and then sort of a middle line. But again, every single design alternative getting at least a few green votes when it came to accessibility to the facilities and to the programs for people with many different kinds of needs, whether those are different mental abilities or physical abilities, backgrounds, and also their interests. Okay, parks and natural spaces. This is an interesting one, and I think that also gets to the point that Grover was sharing earlier about the trade-offs between parking and the green space. 2 performed the highest overall, but we did see that 3, 4, and here the 5A and 5B got a lot of green votes in that they were able to make the best use of that stewardship of parks, natural, and open areas. 1A got the most red votes here, and 1B was kind of in the middle with a few red votes. But that's one area where it was kind of flipped on its head in some of the other trends that we see. And I think we can all surmise why, but I'm curious to hear from the task force a little bit more detail to that. Okay, stewardship of funding, again, 2 comes out on top, but we also see that a lot of yellow when it comes to 1A, 3, 4 got quite a few yellow as well. 1A also has a fair few red, and then 5A and 5B, you know, they have that lower price tag attached to them. But you can see some folks, I think, feeling that the good value for money, the cost-efficient operations, you know, still some red votes there. But this was one where option 2 clearly was got the most green and yellow votes and no red. When it came to sustainable practices, we saw more of an even spread. Again, 2's on top, but we see greens in almost all of them, and we don't see any reds. And actually, a fair number of folks said that this, or a couple folks in this case said that this wasn't really applicable. And my guess is, as the design team has kind of alluded to, there are ways to make all of these design alternatives environmentally friendly, depending on the materials and techniques that they're using. And that would be something that could be decided in later phases. But for this place, we kind of see, again, choose the preferred winner, but we have more of an even spread and no red votes on any of these. When we get to results from responsible community involvement, taking in that input from the public and from stakeholders, including yourselves, we see 2 on top, followed closely by 1B, and then 1A kind of is right split between red and green, yellow and green, and then 3 lands in the middle, 4 sort of lands in the middle as well. Sorry, that should be red, not purple. My apologies. And then 5A and 5B are sort of trailing there a little bit. Opportunities for art and creative expression. We see 2, 1B and 1A kind of at the top bunch with 10 votes for 2 and 9 each for 1A and 1B. And then sort of in the middle with 5B really landing in the middle with fewer greens and more reds. So what does all of this tell us? Again, generally, as I started this off with, we see that option 2 really scored the highest overall. In all those criteria, 2 kind of takes the cake in a lot of those in that your evaluation indicated it performed the best against those criteria. Generally speaking as well, again, it's not true for all of them, especially when it comes to those questions of park space and of stewardship of funds, but 5A and 5B generally tended to score the lowest. And then we had mixed results between 1A, 1B, 3, and 4. And some where the 1 scored higher, and then some where 3 and 4 scored higher. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We can always go back to the results, but you all took the survey, so I'm sure that you can illuminate a little bit more. But my question for you, and this is again kind of really guided. I want to hear from every member of the task force tonight, but it's really guided by tell us what you like and why. I'm going to suggest that we not talk as much about option 2, because I think it's quite clear for a lot of people that that's really the winner. And I think we could spend a lot of time talking about why it's the winner, but really the difficult question tonight is, what about those ones that sort of scored in the middle? Again, we want to take 3 alternatives out to the public. So what about 1A and 1B? What about 3? What about 4? And a question for the task force is, do we take the 5s off the table? Or are there people right now who feel like one of the either 5A or 5B should go out to the public? Again, balancing that question of whether or not you want to take something for the public to weigh in on that you really don't feel is a viable option. But again, the survey is only telling us a little slice of that. So I'd like to hear from you. And Grover is saying, how did we get 28 votes? I don't think we only got 13 people who took the survey. So I think we only got 13 votes in that one. I think some folks chose not to answer some questions, so they might not all square out. So I'm curious who would like to kick us off. I've kind of posed some open-ended questions for you, but just to talk through again, what are you sitting with? And if you have a sense of 3 alternatives that you feel like would be a good range to take out to the public. And I'm looking for hands, either physically in the space, or you can pop into the chat, or you can raise your hand using the participant box or hovering over. Okay, I see a hand from Mark. So Mark, why don't you go ahead and kick us off?
I was afraid you're going to ask me to go first. I should go last. Well, I'll just share a couple of thoughts that I have, and I hope this is helpful. I did come up with the same 3 choices of 2, 1B, 1A. And I felt that 1B and 1A, did a much better job of meeting the criteria. 1B for me is that we do not have the cross of pedestrians across a traffic path, and that's a really big issue for me. What I didn't particularly care for in 1A and 1B is the connection to the street to the north. I feel like that could be problematic to have 2 entrances to the site from 2 different locations, and having traffic go through the site that we really don't want to have happen. And I really felt that the other options, 3, 4, 5A and B, just really didn't meet the criteria. I felt like for 3 and 4, somebody was losing out. It was either the library or the community center. And I just felt as though the cost difference between those 2 just didn't really justify going there. So I think those are my, initial thoughts.
Great, thank you, Mark. I also see a hand from Shonda. Shonda, why don't you go ahead?
Yes, I can kind of reiterate Mike's position. I like 2 the best. 1A and B, I think, are good, but I really don't like the parking taking over the park space. And I think 5A and B really shortchange some group. So in terms of offering 3 to the public, my thought is maybe pick 1 in the middle. Obviously it would be 2 because that was the highest received. And then pick 1 of the 5A, 5B, or 4 that's completely different, and 1 of the high end, 1A and 1B, to give the public a clear delineation of what could be possible.
And I'm curious, Shonda, thank you for that. Do you have any preferences? I mean, and also just sharing with us, I hear your concerns about the parking, but between, 3, 4, were there ones for you that really emerged as kind of winners?
3, I like 3 a lot. I like 2 the best, I like 3 a lot.
Can you tell me why you like 3 a lot?
I think, let's see, the only qualities that I felt that it did not meet was the community center recreation activity and the welcoming, including, and supporting multiple functions. Everything else I pretty much scored high on it.
Got it. So that was with a couple of exceptions. It really kind of met a lot of the needs of the criteria, and you liked it.
Yes, I like 2 better, but I like 3 as well. That was my second choice.
Great.
I think 1A and 1B take up too much of the park space and is not a good source of funding for stewardship of funding.
Mm-hmm.
And 5A and 5B just shortchange so much.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you, Shonda.
Yeah.
Okay. Who else would like to chime in? And you can just raise your hand if you'd like. Yes, Jan Lindstrom, go for it. And then I see Jan and then Mike and then Kim.
I wanted to also point out that my virtual background is a 1930s library.
Cool. I thought you were in a haunted house, maybe.
I'm just trying to encourage a little Art Deco in the design. I wanted to say that I think it would be fabulous to spend $32 million on all of this, but I think as good stewards of the taxpayer dollars and the NCPRD money and everything else, the freestanding library in the end didn't really make sense to me for a number of reasons. One is it's costly. The other reason is when I really look at it being away from the community center in the main building, it just feels like too far away. I think we're going to lose a lot of the, I've been a bookseller where you have to run books on carts back and forth, and I just pictured a giant book signing going on in the community room, and that we were taking supplies back. Oh, we forgot this, and it's over there. I don't know. I just think having it closer is going to be better. One of the reasons why I like option 2 so much is because the library is closer to the green space, and it also seems to have more light. The way the design looks that you've drawn it, it feels very light-filled without being a standalone library, so I feel like it achieves the best of all things while keeping the cost down. I also wanted to point out that I have Thelma behind me here as a visitor, but you can't see her because the virtual background isn't letting her in yet.
All good.
Get closer, and I'm keeping her 6 feet away.
Jan, I'm curious for you, when it comes to the 5s, do you feel like those should still be on the table? You might have said that, but I had a little bit of trouble hearing you at first. I'm just curious.
You mean for the 3, boiling it down to the 3, or?
Yeah, kind of. We know 2 is your favorite, but if you had to pick 2 more to go to community, what might your choices be?
I would probably go option 3, option 4.
So for you, it's 2, 3, 4?
Yeah.
Cool. Great. Thank you, Jan. How about over to Mike, and then we'll go to Kim.
Well, I have to say I spent a lot of time on this, and I had to tear that booklet apart. Sorry, Opsis, but I tore it apart and reorganized it so I could go through the different alternatives completely by themselves. And then I put together separate pieces of paper with my pros and cons, and then listed all the criteria at the bottom and scored them at the bottom before I went on the actual survey. I have to say, but by the time I was done, it was a 2 aspirin day. It was amazing. I took my hat off, but you guys, Opsis people, I take my hat off to you for coming up with all that. What a challenge. Anyway, like you've been saying, 2 is my top favorite. What I didn't like about 1A or 1B was largely due to the parking. On 1A, I don't like that access between the 2 parking areas and having to cross that to get to the community center. I didn't like the fact that it's so far removed from the community center. And 2, the 2 of them are nestled together. The library part has its own identity, but it's a much more welcoming arrangement in my viewpoint. But in 1A and 1B, I didn't like either of the parking arrangements at all. I'm on the history guy, so I didn't like the fact that the what do you call it, Jim? The monumental staircase
Right.
away.
Yeah.
I didn't like that at all.
Removing it. Yeah.
Removing that.
Yeah.
And that was 1A, right?
It was. Yeah.
But in 1B, didn't it stay there? I get confused.
Yeah,
But
it stayed there in 1B.
In 1B.
Yeah.
3 had Oh, and the other part of 1A and 1B both is that it takes so much away from the park. We all talked about having park space, and that ate up a lot of park. Also, the cost of 1A and 1B scares me. It's so much higher, relatively speaking, than the other options. So when all was said and done, I narrowed it down to my preferred 3 options that I would put forth to the public, and I picked 2, 3, and 4.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. And I mean, really hats off to you and to everyone else for doing the work, because it's not easy. But I'm glad that you got your book all in order. Kim, over to you.
I agree with Mike that I think the options, you know, option 2 is really the one that makes the most sense to me. I appreciated the idea of options 1A and 1B. I liked the amphitheater and option 1A quite a bit, but I think the cost it scares me as well. You know, I don't want voters to have to vote on a bond measure, or, you know, I think we all need to be very careful with the way that we're spending funds right now, especially in a recession. So I think that options 5 should just go away. I don't think they meet enough of the criteria. And if I had to pick 2 more, I would pick 3 and 4.
Great. Thank you, Kim. Okay, Paul, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to take a slightly different take on this, because I came into this thinking, wow, a freestanding library would be really cool and really nice and really support the community well. And I'm representing the Friends of the Library, so you'd think that would be a natural. But, you know, looking at the schemes, I also really like option 2, and I think clearly that's, you know, that certainly changed my mind about the freestanding option. And I think we all majority of us tend to agree that's sort of the best way to do it. But when we're putting something in front of the public, to me, there's not a lot of difference between 3 and 4, and you're kind of forcing them to choose between the community center and the library. You know, which do you think is more valuable between those 2? And I tend to put, and I agree that 5 is kind of compromise that nobody's happy with. I would tend to put 1B as the 3rd option, and as an option in front of the public, just to show them, here's an option that was looked at. Here's the cost for a new library. You know, let's see if there's public support for something like that. Doesn't necessarily mean, I mean, this is just 3 options for discussion. It doesn't mean that they're picking or, you know, choosing or they get the final say, but we're looking for input that says, here, we looked at a new library. This is what a new library is going to cost. This is what we've got in terms of the community center. And this is kind of the whole site being developed. And granted, yeah, the park, the green space is really heavily impacted by that. The hard part I have, or the challenge I have, is picking between, you know, 3 and 4. And since I'm kind of representing the library side, I'd pick 3. But it's a real challenge there to say, okay, sorry, Scott, you guys don't get the gymnasium, but we get a library, you know. And that, to me, that's a discussion that is a little more challenging to have. So I would have to, personally, I would say 3, 2, and 1B would be my 3 choices I would put as a variety for the public to comment on.
Thank you, Paul. That's great. Okay, who's next? Okay, Gary, you're right next to me, so go right ahead.
Okay, interestingly, I'm following Paul because that was my 3 choices as well. Option 2 would be my first choice for all the above reasons. And option 1B, I liked. It's not that far away from the Concord building, and there's no parking lot running between them. It give you a lot of space. It provide a lot more room inside the community center for all the other activities. And option 3, it would be my 3rd choice, and it would still allow for quite a bit of activity for other activities in the school building. As far as the cost goes on option 1B or any of the upper end ones, I just thought I'd throw this out to put it in perspective. There's another task force that's been meeting in Portland for about 3 or 4 years, maybe a little ahead of us, concerned with the replacing the Burnside Bridge. And they just this past week came out with their recommendation. They had come down to 3 choices. And one was to leave the bridge as is, one was to retrofit it for seismic purposes. The third choice is the one they came up and recommended, is to replace the bridge. And it's sort of paralleling what we're doing. Only their cost for replacing it is $825 million. So pity the people in Multnomah County.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. And I think you kind of bring up that point that Paul made of, what would the public say about something with a higher price tag? That Burnside Bridge example is one where the trade-offs of what you get with a higher price tag for that group, spoiler alert, I also facilitate that committee, but it is kind of that trade-off of what you get with a higher price tag. So I appreciate you bringing that in, because we have, my notes are indicating we're kind of neck and neck on those options there to go out to the public, but thank you, Gary. All right, who else? I know you've got opinions, folks. How about I pick on Doug? Go for it.
See my hand on its way up. I'm feeling the same as Gary and Paul, actually. I feel like I'm there. I like the idea of a freestanding library. Again, I'll echo that. And as a librarian, I feel like that's, and I'm accustomed to that. So, the traditional library is its own building. A library in a partnership is kind of a novel concept. I won't say novel, but it's less typical, let's say. I don't like that it takes away so much park space. I don't like the parking arrangements for either of them. But I do agree. I feel like if we're going to be serious about giving the public some options and see what they think, that having them at least be able to consider one option that involves a freestanding library, and maybe they say, we'd rather have a freestanding library than more park. That's something I'd like to at least have an option out on the table for the public to come back to us. 2 is I agree, is clearly the most balanced one. So I agree with everybody on that one. Between 1A and 1B, that's a tough call for me. I don't like the split parking lot, but I also don't like 1A, but I also don't like in 1B, where the majority of parking seems to be away from the main building, with the exception of the freestanding library. So there's some challenges with that. But ultimately, I think 1B is probably the stronger of the 2. And then when it comes to the others, the 5s for me are just don't accomplish the goal that we're looking for. And so we might as well come up with a whole different project if we were thinking those were even contenders. Between 3 and 4, yes, I've said before, I really don't like the library space in option 4, whereas option 3 is more viable. So I'd go with, those would be my choices, would be 1B, 2, and 3.
Okay, thank you, Doug. Rose just popped into the chat. You can read her comments, but I'm going to read them out loud because she has some noisy roofers. So she has to stay muted, so we are not subjected to her roofing noise. But she says she has a strong preference for 2, and it best met all of the community goals and values. She's not a big fan of lots of parking spaces, preferring more green space and a larger plaza for outdoor concerts and other performances and gatherings. She also likes the preservation of the Concord School historic facade in all options. Her recommendation for the 3 options would be option 2, option 1B, and 4. She doesn't like the location of the library so far from the parking and access to public transportation, and does not want to lose important recreation space. Rose, I hope I captured that correctly. Folks can read it in the chat, but if your roofers stop and you get a moment, just let me know if you want to pipe in, and we'd love to hear your voice. But that looks like 1B, 2, and 4 from Rose. Thank you. Anybody else? Grover, you're kind of next in my view. I'm wondering if you want to share or if you want to wait. You'll wait? Okay. Dennis, how about you? Great.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So awesome. Awesome work to set this up. A good scoring guide. I mean, a really good scoring guide. Appreciate that. So for me, I struggled at first with what do I want and what do I think would be a menu for the public, some different choices for the public. And when I got that straightened out, it was the job was a lot easier to do when I started thinking we want to give the public options. So for me, I couldn't stand behind the 5A and 5B, taking that out. I don't think it honors maybe a few of our values. And I think people would be super upset to say, you've been working for months and months and this is the best you've come up with. Although it is a big option for them. It's an extreme option. On the other hand, so is 1A and 1B, because I think it's expensive and it narrows down on the park side, which is important to me, the park side. So really, when I started thinking about it and thinking about the public, I think out of 1A, 1B, probably 1B is best. I think having worked a lifetime with young kids and having the parking lot go through the traffic space between the two buildings, that's a little too scary for an old principal. But I would have picked 1B, 2, and then I struggle with 3 and 4. I'm a community center guy, and so I want the new gym. But this is really about a library as much, or maybe more. I mean, library has been prevalent in every conversation we've had.
Mm-hmm.
Probably if we look back at the narrative and did one of those word grams, library would come up a ton. Park and community center seem a lot less. People are maybe less, most concerned about the library. So, but because it's about the library, I'd probably go with 3, where the library is built anew in the east quarter there. So I'd get rid of 4 and 5A and 5B right off the bat.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can probably vote on that right now and it would pass. So 1B, 2, and 3 would be my choices.
Well, thank you, Dennis.
Yeah.
Okay, Ron, do you feel like you're ready to weigh in, or do you want to? I can also come back to you.
No, I can go now.
Cool.
Well, first of all, I'm with most of the rest of you, if not all the rest of you, and that, option 2 is my favorite, and to the point where I think it stands out dramatically from every other alternative that's being discussed here. So there's no question in my mind. I see a couple of things that I think could use some refinement, but aside from that, it's clearly the best in my mind. What I did was I went through and first of all, paid attention to what the consultants had said about the challenges and opportunities, but I also paid attention to what the public has said in the open house and in the survey instrument, and to pick out what clearly are the most important features to everyone. And then basically asked myself the question all the way through, alternative by alternative, where are the drawbacks of each one? In other words, if you start out with rating each one high, where are the drawbacks? And for each significant drawback, I would basically ding it by 1 notch out of the 3. And what I came up with overall was, once again, 2 way on top, 3 second, 4 third, 1A next, and then 1B. Now, when it came to 5A and B, I quickly realized in considering 5A and B in relation to the criteria, and realized that realize that it's like comparing apples and oranges. We've known for some time now, ever since all of the uses that are anticipated for this property, the desired uses, have been on the table. The existing building by itself is simply not big enough. It's way too small, and it's got retrofitting challenges. And so it has constraints to begin with. So comparing 5A and B to the other alternatives is just like comparing apples and oranges. So I said, I'm not even going to bother to rate 5A and 5B. What I would like to have seen instead of those two alternatives is an alternative that considers what the existing building can be reasonably well and what it can't be reasonably well, and then rate it on that basis, because it doesn't have the luxury of, well, we'll just add some more space and see if we can address these other issues with other space. It doesn't have that luxury, so it's not quite the same thing. So I didn't rate 5A and B, and I am also going to send an email that basically goes into a little more detail about what I just said about 5A and B. So, to answer the question about should it be in the mix at all, my initial take on it would be no, probably not. There's no good reason for that. This project has gone a different direction that involves much more in terms of uses than what the existing building by itself can handle. But beyond that, once again, 2 came out on top, then 3, then 4, then 1A, 1B. The differences between 1A and 1B, and if you'll bear with me here, I took notes on each of these criteria and why it got dinged for a point or two. 1A, both 1A and 1B, in my mind, don't balance, support and balance all of the uses. And it's a lot about the park space. The park space is the smallest of any of them. It's got an undersized sports field. It's got little wooded area. It's got no trail. These are all things that were important to the public, that were conveyed by the public. I don't want to take too much time here, and so I'm trying to do this in a nutshell as much as I can.
You're good, Ron. Go right ahead.
It doesn't, neither 1A or 1B support community center and recreation center uses as well as other alternatives either. And I think it had to do with the, they had to do with the active space above community rooms primarily. So it's something that can be fixed through redesign. When it comes to the history, whether the history is being honored, 1B came out below 1A. Both of them in some way compromise the facade of the 1936 building in some way. But 1B blocks in a very important view of the historic building as you enter the property. And that, I think, is a big one. It's a big one to me. When it comes to the traffic circulation, 1B really takes the road and parking quite a ways from the community center. In fact, I was looking at the diagram and thinking to myself, okay, you enter the property on that low corner, and as you're driving in through the first parking lot and then around the library to the second parking lot, all the while going, okay, well, how do I get over to the community center? And so, it is very removed. Both of them are removed. And of course, 1A also has the road dividing the two. 1A and 1B to me also, for obvious reasons, they don't have the same synergy with the existing building, nor do they with the park that option 2 offers. So those are kind of the highlights. And of course, funding, that's another one. I don't want to be too repetitious here, but funding is another matter. So when it came to alternative 3, I think I said already that I don't really like any of the other alternatives very much. Alternative 3 has the library, but loses the big gym. And alternative 4 has the big gym but loses the existing gym, and that's also been called out repeatedly as an important feature. So any alternative that didn't have that existing gym as part of it, you know, it got dropped in the rating as far as I was concerned. So if I look at this, I'm going to wrap it up here because I could go on about other factors, but if I I realize when it comes to choosing 3, if I were to go just based on the rating system, I would say 2, 3, and 4. I really don't like 1 or A or B, for some of the same reasons that have already been mentioned. I believe 5A and B should just be off the table. But I think there are also some political reasons for including one of the options for a freestanding library. I don't believe my choice would be 1B, simply because of the impact it has on the historic building. Although, yes, I do have a problem with the road dividing the 2 buildings. So yeah, and again, 3 and 4, 1 loses the library, the other one loses the big gym. And one of those, again, the existing gym is lost. So I'll stop there.
That's great. Thank you for that, Ron. And it's useful to kind of hear your thinking and why you went with that. And I appreciate that folks are so conscious of, okay, I have my personal preference, and I also realize that there are things that maybe the public should see or should understand as part of this larger conversation together. So I really appreciate the thought and care that you put into that, Ron. It's really helpful. Okay, the only 2 folks I haven't heard from yet are Grover and Anna. Anna, I can't see you, but I'm assuming that you're there. I'm wondering if you want to just unmute yourself and say hello.
Hello.
There you are. Hi. Hello.
Hi. Yes, I would be happy to share. So I agree 2 is my favorite, and I'll say why, because it applies to for a lot of reasons everybody's mentioned here, but one thing that stood out to me was, one thing that I really hoped to see was almost like a living room space as you came in that was kind of big and open and inviting and really drew people in, even if they didn't have their head down with the task right on the tip of their tongue where they were going, right? But a space that sort of draws people into like the different spaces and good, like healthy, happy permeability between the 2. And I think 2 did that in a really lovely way, in ways I couldn't have imagined. You guys did a really excellent job. I think as far as the other options, if I had to decide between 3 and 4, which I don't like to do, I would say I'd maybe give the edge to 3 because it has a little more of that shared, open, inviting kind of permeable space. And also I think the loss of the existing gym and stage was a pretty big priority that I heard kind of all throughout our time together. And I agree as for the 3rd option with what Paul was saying, just that I actually think it's really a smart idea to give a picture of the range of options you looked at and what the cost is of a freestanding library. And frankly, I think it doesn't hurt to have a more expensive option, right, than the one we're choosing, to show like we chose options that would give us good cost stewardship. And between 1A and 1B, I think 1B, I like the not crossing traffic, and I like at least the courtyard permeability between the 2 spaces.
Thank you, Anna. I appreciate that. And looks like Kim's chiming in with a good point about the cost. Cool. Grover, over to you.
Thank you. And I really enjoyed listening to all of you. It's, this is a group that was brought together with some representing parks and some representing library, but I so appreciate the full array of conversation that included looking at both of them significantly. And I tried to do that as well, and I really identified with what Ron said. It took me hours to complete that survey because I didn't want to just vote. I wanted to put comments in and so on and so forth. And so and I was swearing a bit of it because of, like Mike said, I didn't tear my book apart. I've got tabs back and forth and back and forth. So enough on my life story. I agreed with most of the comments I heard. I would just start with, I don't think 5A, 5B really does justice to any of the choices. And then clearly for me, 2 is the best choice. And if you read from the questions I had before and stuff, I have some ideas about tweaking, but I know we'll still have that opportunity going forward. But I'm really torn between either a freestanding option or 3 or 4. And there's drawbacks with every one of them. So 1B, 1A, 3, and 4, they all have drawbacks. From looking at it from what our community needs, to lose the little gym, to only have the little gym and no large library like it does in 3, that's really significantly loss of potential. And I'd heard Scott say before how much need there is in the Parks District to have a gym, and to just go down to that little gym. It's a school gym. Actually, it's an elementary school gym. So then that takes me over to 4, and I just cringe at the idea of the library, although it's on the top floor instead of the bottom floor. Having the library be inside that building, it just gets this sense of like it's like going to school. It is not a community library. It's a school library. It's confined to that. And then back to the thing about 1A and 1B, I've fought long and hard, and I think I'll accept defeat about trying to figure out a way not to take up all that parking space. But 1A and 1B, the distance to getting in from parking, the amount of space that's eaten up in parking, I don't find them attractive choices. But at the same time, I agree with the thought that, well, maybe we should give the public a chance to see the 3 variables. And I am clearly most in favor of number 2. So I don't know how to vote. I mean, 2, and then, gee, well, then 1B and 3, or is it, at least the library there is an open space and it has more light and whatnot, although it is on the north side of the building up against a hill. That's where I live right now. My house is up against the hill, and anyway, so it loses a lot. It does get the southern exposure, so light will come in that way. So if I had to choose, besides 2, so it'd either be 3 and 4, or it would be 2 and 3 and 1B. But there's trade-offs on all of them. So I think we should offer 4 choices. But since I probably won't carry the day here, I don't know.
Well, maybe it might be helpful just to kind of talk through. I mean, one, thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts and feedback and for articulating, the tremendous amount of brain work that went into this. I mean, thank you all for that. It might be useful to share a little bit of our thinking about the virtual open house and what this might look like, and why we're thinking 3 alternatives. And then we can talk about what that looks like. So one of the things we want to be sure to do is not to overwhelm the public with too much information, but we also really want to be clear about what the differences are between those alternatives and frame them in a way that's super easy to understand. We're trying to keep like 8th grade reading level as best that we can. So this is accessible for 8th graders and 80-year-old people. Like anybody could take this online open house, walk through this online open house, learn about the alternatives, and share their feedback. We also want to be really clear to illustrate, and you all really articulated that, and I think will help us put this language together on what are the trade-offs. 1A, 1B, you do get that freestanding library, but you have more parking and you sacrifice park space. So let's make sure that the public is aware of some of those trade-offs using language that is quite neutral. And we're spending a lot of time kind of putting this together and thinking deeply about it. So we want to be sure that we get a clear indication from you all this evening on which 3 we can go forward with to build this out. Because it is, it's a lot of information and a lot of stuff. One thing we've been thinking about, which I want to pose to you all as well, is having a link that can show the other alternatives that maybe we're not asking for input on, but indicate, hey, here are some other things that the design team put together. You know, if you watched the task force meeting and you joined in, you saw that there were 7 alternatives. This is some of the reasoning why, you know, we're not asking for your input, or some of the drawbacks, because I think it might be useful for the community to know why you all agreed 5A and 5B really shouldn't be on the table. There's too many concessions there. You're not getting great outcomes really for anyone in that scheme, but it might be really useful for the public to know some of your rationale and see that those are things that were on the table, but this group in your advisory capacity has decided that we really shouldn't maybe be evaluating those because those aren't going to get us the outcomes that we want. You all, and I think Paul made this distinction as well, you know these schemes inside and out, and the public will learn about them and be able to weigh in, and we want to get their nuanced feedback. But ultimately, you are the body charged with making a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, who are the ultimate decision-making body here. So if there are things, you know, as we go into refinement and you are thinking about, wow, I really do love 3 and 4, but we only put, let's say we only put 3 out for the public, well, let's keep talking about what are some of those features of 4. Let's say 3 ends up being the alternative. I don't think this is going to happen based on your feedback this evening. But let's say 3 is the alternative that the public loves. You talk a little bit more and you decide, wow, 3 is really the one we want to go with. But there are elements of 4 we want to talk about, like why some of those things work and why they don't. You know, we can still kind of, we can have those conversations as a group and make sure that the design team is taking in all of your feedback into refinement. Not to say that we can pick and choose, that you can kind of take this piece and like stick it in here and Frankenstein them together. But you still are going to be able to have those nuanced conversations together about those different alternatives. I heard pretty clearly that the 5 aren't really a part of the conversation anymore, and that there is pretty clear consensus in the group that 2 is the favorite. But I also heard some disagreement in the group and some really compelling reasons why that I think we can assume that we're going to take 2 out to the public for sure. That's going to be out there. So our question now is, based on your, you know, what you told me and kind of I was tallying up while you were chatting, it looks like it's between, we're definitely taking out 2. We had a number of people say that they want to take out 3 as well. And then we had people say 1B. You know, if I were to just do a simple majority, that's kind of what we're looking at, 1B, 2, and 3. But we also had some folks say some compelling reasons for taking out 4 and for 1A. So knowing that there could be an option for the public to see some of those other alternatives that maybe didn't make the cut, so to say, and to say that, you know, these can continue to be a part of your conversation going forward. Also, if you don't think that the public should see any of the other options and you have reasons why, please tell me that, because we want to make sure we're not opening up a Pandora's box here as well. But it might be useful because there was a lot of care put into that and a lot of care in your evaluation of these that we might want to just share with the public. It's an idea. I just maybe want to open it up for some thoughts. Right now, simple majority, it's looking like 1B, 2, and 3 going out to the public. But if you don't feel comfortable with that, or you maybe changed your mind after thinking about it a little bit more, you have additional thoughts, I would love to hear them now. Or if you think those are the 3 that should go out to the public, you can let me know that that's your thinking. And, oh, I'm seeing some thumbs up. Okay. So I guess I would just want to open up some space. That was almost everybody who gave a thumbs up. But is there anybody who maybe doesn't feel comfortable with those 3 alternatives, 1B, 2, and 3 going out to the public? Oh, I see a hand. Who is it? It's Mark. It's Mark. Go right ahead.
Well, I just wanted to throw something out there. 3 and 4 are essentially the same. We're adding an addition for either the library or a gym. Is there an opportunity for us to throw 3 out there as an either or rather than a one or the other? Does that make sense? Is that too much for the public? 3 and 4 are essentially the same. All you're doing is changing the library versus gym, right? So it may take some more work on our part to figure out which one is going to work best. And is there a reason for us to, at this point, to zero in on one versus the other? Because I think both 3 and 4 have some big problems with them that would have to be resolved. And so would it be helpful to the public to say, well, 3, the option 3 could be a library edition or a gem edition, and we're going to work it out, just so that we aren't in a position, if we change our mind halfway through the process, to find out that 3 doesn't really work or 4 doesn't really work. Does that make sense? I'm just trying to give us ourselves as a team a little bit more leeway.
Mm-hmm. I think I'm seeing what you're saying, like maybe having it where it's almost like 2 versions of 3, like there's gem and there's library, and that folks are able to kind of see both of those. So really kind of to Grover's point of putting out 4 alternatives. I know Ron has his hand up, but I'm going to let Catherine weigh in. You're below me, Catherine.
So, Mark, you're very creative. It seems to me if you go out with an either or, you're going out with an option that doesn't have a library if people choose the gym. And so I don't think that meets the basic criteria of what the public has asked for. Does that make sense? No?
I'm seeing shaking heads. I think folks are confused.
I guess maybe I don't understand.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't understand.
He wants, this gem, if I understand, it's like they're both doing additions on the back side of the building. Can there be a variable that we could decide later whether it's a library or a gym? Do we need to make that decision right now? I do think one thing, just to emphasize a little bit, is there's compromises for both recreation and library. The question is which one's a greater compromise? And from the detailed meetings we've had with Mitzi and others, and Ray can chime in here too, when you put the library up on the 2nd floor, just working within the existing confines, it's I think operationally has some real challenges, and is it really a functional library? And it's, in terms of a footprint, it's almost, 19,000, 20,000 square feet. It's a lot of area to know that you're going into it and it's compromised. From the recreation standpoint, you can still have the smaller, in either option, you have the group exercise rooms. But one, you still have a gym that's a multicultural space, multi-use, but it's a small gym, and that's the compromise. And it doesn't provide, the adequate court length and tolerances. But so yeah, it's I think they're really quite different in a way.
I would add, we worked very hard to get 4 to work as well as it does as a library.
Yeah.
So,
there were 5 other options.
It's kind of as good as it gets, and it's significantly compromised. I think Mitzi nodding her head there would probably agree with me on that. So it's an inferior library solution to start with.
Ron, you had your hand up, and then I think you took it down. Did you want to say something, or did you retract that?
Well, I would be repeating in different words what Jim just said, so that's why I took my hand down. Jim just articulated it very well.
Confirming that. So I
can I just add one point to maybe what Ron was thinking, and also what everyone's alluded to, is that option 4 also has a pretty major impact on the historic importance of the building. And some of the things that have been noted by our historic consultant have to do with the proscenium and have to do with the gym in itself. So, we've tried to respect that, I think, as Ray and Jim allude to, but it does have a much more major impact on the historic nature of the interior of the building. That option does.
Good point.
So folks, I'll maybe ask again How do you feel as a task force, knowing that, you know, doors are not necessarily closed, but we're starting to narrow, we're starting to winnow these options down, about taking 1B, 2, and 3 out to the public? And if you can maybe just indicate like you're cool with that by giving me a thumbs up. Okay, so I'm seeing, and then Shonda, if you want to just verbally say how you're feeling.
Yes, I think that would be an acceptable options for the public.
Great. Okay, so I did not see thumbs up from Mike, Grover, and Ron. So I'm just curious if you want to share anything. We're kind of, at this point, we're so, you know, our charter looks for a 3/4. Oh, that was a thumbs up from Mike. Okay, so Ron and Grover, I'm curious, I know we had some kind of struggles there with those options, and you noted some really, you know, spot on concerns that I think other folks share, but if you want to share any of your concerns with taking those 3 out to the public.
I'll go.
Go ahead, Ron.
Well, because option 3 has a much better library. It has a much better library than option 4. I would rather see option 3 than option 4. So that would probably be my second choice behind option 2 for public review. Beyond that, it's really a tough call for me. Once again, 1A and 1B came out at the bottom of the list, putting aside 5A and 5B. And it's, with option 3, you get that better library, but you don't get the bigger gym. With option 4, you compromise the library and you get the big gym. It's just a tough call.
Yeah.
And I'm just, I have not been really interested in endorsing anything but option 2, to be honest with you. But I guess my question here is, and I realize you don't want to complicate the public involvement too much, but at the same time, I'll ask the question, what about the option of just putting everything except 5A and 5B out for public consumption?
My instinct is that that's a lot of information for the public, and that it is quite overwhelming. I mean, I think about the hours that we've spent together, hours and hours, and the reality is often with the public, we have a pretty short attention span. We'll have some people who are deeply committed and who have been following this process. But for some folks, and we're looking at, translating this material into other languages and making sure it's something that can be shared in Spanish, or, with young people and with, folks who we might not have the same amount of time to kind of share some of this stuff with. So I'm concerned about that, and making sure that we're putting out something that is going to be fair to the public and not be overwhelming. That being said, I think we can take that into heart. We are designing this all right now, and that can be a conversation that Catherine, Jim, Jennifer, and we can have to see if there are other ways. My instinct is that it's really probably not the best idea. And I see Jim kind of shaking his head in your nonverbal body language. You're right next to me, Jim. Is that that's going to be a real challenge. But I think I do kind of want to just remind you, we're going to try really hard to engage folks who might not have hours to discuss this, but we do think that their input is important. So making it something that can be, translatable, easy to understand, I think will help us engage more folks. But I can say we can think about it. It's just maybe not. That's my personal.
Add in that your comment before about having a link to all the schemes on the website gives people that would like to look at what else was considered more deeply the opportunity, because there might be an option to add more comment in reviewing the schemes. I just mean that kind of addresses that need to let everybody see all the considerations without making it too overwhelming at the survey level, but could go farther. I don't know, just an idea.
So I have a thought about, I think this is really, really complicated, and trying to put it into a survey for people who may not have seen this before is really hard. So one idea I was thinking, if there seems to be a lot of discussion about 3 and 4, is maybe just taking 2 out to the public. It might make it very much easier for the public to understand all of the issues. And that's what we want. So I know it's 5 minutes to 7 and it's kind of a late hour to propose something like this, but it does seem like 2 is the clear winner from this group so far. And I also know that from the broader public, there's been an extraordinary amount of discussion about a new library. So that would really frame the discussion for everyone. Just a thought.
Ron, I see your hand, but I'm going to get Kim and Dennis first and then circle back to Ron. Kim, go for it.
I really like that idea, Catherine. I think that it was really difficult for me to choose anything other than option 2. So I'm in support of just taking option 2 out to the public.
I meant actually 2 options. So it would be probably 1B and 2. So people can get the perspective of a freestanding versus the addition.
Got it.
Yeah.
Are you still, Kim, are you still kind of, you'd be supportive of that?
I think that what I'm hearing from everybody really is that we all like option 2 and everything else is kind of a compromise. So I think whatever that looks like, I don't have any, we need to put out this other option as well. Thoughts, I think it's option 2 and then everything else is just, here you go.
Got it. Okay, Dennis, and then over to Ron.
I'm not sure I like it. I think 3, when I think about putting stuff out to the public, we don't want to give them 7 different things that, we've looked at 7, all these 7, go ahead and take a peek at them. But I think there is some significant difference between those standalones and then the build-in and then the one on the north end. And I think those are 3 clear pictures of this, and whether we like them a lot, we all like 2, we're going to go to 2. I think for the public, they should see different colors of this process through the different alternatives. And then I think you're going to have some challenges even picking 1B over 3 and 4. I'd need to go back and look at those.
Mm-hmm.
And I would struggle with that a little bit. So
okay.
Not a fan of the 2.
Paul chimed in the chat. Oh yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Just real quick, one thought, it's just kind of an obvious thing, but in 1B and 2, there's gyms as an addition on the back side of the existing school. And that's the one interesting, one of the aspects of 3, I think that's interesting, is to say, well, what if the library's there? It's different, whereas 4 almost feels like very similar to any of the 1s or 2. Just a thought.
Over to Ron and then Grover.
Well, a couple of related questions. First of all, when you say, the document will be available for public review in the public involvement process, during the public involvement process. So I presume that means that the summary of opportunities and challenges will be there. And, I think it could be important to get that information right up front for people to review, because, people are going to go from the gut more than anything, and they're not typically going to pay attention to more detailed information. So at least having that information right up front where it's available for review, I think is an important thing to do. What was my second question? Will the, I'm losing my train of thought here, but I might come back to this. So let's let somebody else go.
Good.
Yeah, how about we'll go to Grover. Go ahead.
And then you can go back. I just, you keep talking about this process and I don't grasp what the process is. So I think knowing a bit more of that would be helpful for one. But then I didn't quite understand what Jim just said about the difference between 1B and 2, and both of them have the gym on the back. I didn't understand the point that was being made there. And given all the conversations going on, I cannot support 4 for all those reasons that have been added. So now for me, the issue is it just 2 and 3, or is it 1B, 2 and 3? And I still would like to know more about the process to understand why 2 would have any superior over 3, because for me, it shows be 2 and 3, they would get to see all 3 variations quite cleanly: a standalone, a connection, and then all within the existing building. So I'm done. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you've kind of nailed it. You know, if we were not in COVID times, we would be looking at having, you know, a public meeting, much like we did earlier in this process, to invite in folks to learn about these different alternatives and to give us their feedback. We're not in a position to bring people together physically, so we're going to do a similar process online. And so we're designing an online open house, and we'll be showing you this next time and a draft so that you can comment on these things and give us some feedback. But it would be doing exactly that, Grover. It'd be showing folks, you know, some of those designs that you've seen, but in a really simplified way that call out the differences, you know, freestanding library attached, or, you know, whatever the 3 that you decide are, and some of those trade-offs associated with them in language that's hopefully really clear and easy to understand. And then folks could give their feedback. So whether it's rating, you know, against this criteria, how well does this design perform, much like you did, but in sort of a simplified way. So we're going to bring that to you next time. We're working on this right now. But yeah, it would be an opportunity for the public to learn about these alternatives, to see them. We can add additional information. So Ron, I appreciate your comments about, you know, making sure some things are upfront. But it really is, you know, how do we make sure that we're not overwhelming folks with information? Okay, I do want to do a time check. We are at 7:02, and I think for us to be able to move forward with this and to bring you something next time, I want to be sure that we have some clear direction as a team to go forward from you. So I see a hand from Shonda, and we also want to make sure we have some time for public comment. So we'll maybe take a final comment from Shonda, and then kind of recheck in with the group on how they're feeling going forward. Shonda, go ahead.
Just another reiteration of what I said at the beginning. We obviously all like option 2. How about if we float the highest priced one that isn't all that great, 1A or 1B, whichever one, and one of the 5A or Bs, because we want number 2. And with all the criteria spelled out and the pros and cons of those other options, the public will say, yes, 2 is great. I mean, that's forcing the public into choosing what we want, but we've already done the work.
Well, Shonda, that is both terrifying and fascinating. Mark has just chimed into the chat saying that maybe we shouldn't put something in the mix that we can't live with in case the public decides that they love it. Kim also raises an interesting point, and this is something we've discussed internally. You know, you've sent a very clear message today as a task force, and that you really feel that 2 is the most viable option. That could be something that we really share with the public, and making that really clear that, you know, there is, whether it's a star or some kind of narrative that indicates, hey, this task force that has spent, you know, a year and a half working on this process really feels like this is the best option, and here's why. We can be very transparent with the public about that as well. Because I think what I'm hearing is that folks really do want to be sure that folks can get excited about option 2. They understand the opportunities that are in option 2, and that we don't get kind of feedback that doesn't align with the deep thinking that you've had. So that's a trick for us to make sure we're presenting it accordingly, and that we are, you know, framing these things in a way that can be understood. So I want to, Rose has also chimed in the chat, and she said presenting only option 2 or just giving 2 options she would be okay with. I've heard some difference of opinion between going out for 1 and going out for 2 or going out for 3 options. Here's what I'm going to say. I think I saw a majority of folks notes that they were okay with us looking at taking 1B, 2, and 3 out to the public. if we look at the online open house draft next meeting, and you decide, you know what, 3 is too much, and we want to go with 2, we can always take a third away. It's probably better for us to prepare to have 3 alternatives to go out to the public, and then take 1 away, rather than go with 2 and, you know, have to do some more work at the last minute. So we could put that together for your review with those 3 alternatives that it looks like most people are okay with, understanding that 2 really is the desired outcome here. And then we can decide if it makes more sense to go out with 2 or to go out with 3 to the public. How does that sound for folks? I mean, generally, if you feel okay with that approach. Okay. I do see a hand from Grover and Ron. So,
Go ahead, Ron.
Final thoughts here?
Well, I was just going to ask, and my question came back to me. If you just answered part of my question, you just said that the public is going to know that the task force favors option 2. I think that's what I heard.
Certainly. Yeah,
okay.
We can include
so in addition to that, will the public know that these other alternatives, you know, 1A, 1B, 3, and 4, were also considered?
Yes, what I'm hearing is that's an important piece to include as well. So we can certainly include that. Something we had talked about as an idea, and I think that was affirmed for us this evening. So that'll be something we include, yes.
Okay, so I'm going to give the public an opportunity to see what else has been considered, and is there something else here I like?
Right, yeah, absolutely. Okay, Grover, over to you.
I just wanted to, I like seeing things before we're trying to cram it into the 1.5-hour meeting. So can we see that public thing before the meeting so we've had a chance to look at it? Because it won't be set, it's not going out into the world, but that we could see it. And I would have liked to have seen the scoring to have been able to adjust that before we just all of a sudden had it and I couldn't track fast enough. And so that's my request. I'd like to see that before our meeting with enough time to at least look at it.
As best I can, yes. I will do my best effort to make sure that you can get this. And again, this is a really important milestone for us to get your direction on so that we can go forward and keep making this stuff. So yes, Grover, to the best of my ability, I will work to make sure you can review this ahead of the meeting. Cool. Okay, so folks, to summarize, I'm going to take this as the directive from the group is that we work to incorporate options 1B, 2, and 3 into an online open house or our format for public review. We can continue this discussion in our next meeting, and it looks like there's an option here, a question of whether or not we go out with 2 or 3 options to the public, but maybe seeing it will help you make that decision and be a little bit more informed. So we have a bunch of homework to do to get working on this. And next meeting, we also are talking about some other things, mostly is whether you as a group feel that you can recommend to the Board of County Commissioners that one of the options, maybe option 2, is a viable option for the placement of the Concord Library on this property. That was kind of one of the very earliest decisions, that the Concord property would be the first place that you would look for the placement of the Oak Lodge Library. Excuse me, I said the wrong library. Oak Lodge Library on the Concord property. And we want to take some time next meeting to review the public, what would be going out to the public, but also to make sure that you as a task force feel like one of the options that you've been looking at is viable for the placement of the Oak Lodge Library on the Concord property. So we are way over time, but Doug, are you okay if I see if anybody wants to give any public comment this evening? Okay, Doug's nodding. So if you do, okay, I see Jeffrey would like to make a public comment. I'm going to kick us off with the commissioner. Commissioner, I'm going to unmute you if you'd like to say a few words this evening. Go right ahead. You're unmuted.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating discussion, being able to listen in and not be put on the spot. So appreciate all your work. I guess one question you could ask yourselves is if you want to help inform the public when they're viewing these, you could put your rankings and or your rationale as to what you thought was good points or strong points or down, the downsides, and help assist how you got where you ended up at. Or you can choose method where you just put it out there cold turkey and let them decide. But it seems because you're so strong on 2, you might want to look at the latter or the first option. That is, let people or inform people what your rationale was. And that might help inform them, and so they could, so the whatever opinions you get out of this are probably better informed. As complex as this all is, this layout to some degree, but that's all I have. And again, thank you for all your work.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Thanks for joining us and coming along in the process. We appreciate it. Okay, Jeffrey, looks like you're up for public comment, so I'll give you a couple minutes and you are unmuted. Go right ahead. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, too. Oh.
How about now?
There we go. Yep, now we can hear you. Perfect.
Okay, good. So this is Jeffrey Yonke. I've been following this process really since its beginning. And then also, I think, as a member of the Concord Partnership, I think for 4 or 5 years now, I'm not exactly sure, but just a couple comments that I have. I think that 3 options is appropriate to bring to the public. I think that, you know, giving people maybe like a wider breadth of choices, I think is going to give them the confidence that this has been given as much consideration as I know that it's been given. And it's also going to, I think, lead people to have like the public have a greater confidence in choosing, you know, 1 from 3 versus 1 from 2. And then the other comment that I have, I personally love the fact that 1B, 2, and 3 are the ones that you guys are considering. Those are actually my top 3 options as well. I'm curious though to hear from the Parks Department on what the impact would be in losing an opportunity like the large gym. If that's something that's needed, I'd like the Parks Department to step forward and say something about that. Doesn't necessarily have to be tonight, but it'd be nice to hear from them in the future, you know, regarding maybe that loss of opportunity that would come from option 3.
Allison, you're muted.
Yeah, gosh, I'm so sorry, folks. And thank you to Jeffrey, and that I had muted him, and I also saw Scott sit up when that question was raised, and I believe we're 15 minutes over, 12 minutes over our meeting time, so we'll maybe table that for our next meeting, but that will be something that we'd love to hear. So Scott, you're on next time we meet to talk a little bit about some of those concerns raised, because I saw some nodding heads from the task force as well. Okay, so with that, we will close public comment period, and if you're watching this online, you are always welcome to submit written public comment or join us to give public comment at the end of the meeting. So Doug, I'm going to pass it back over to you and maybe to Catherine.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe Catherine wants to talk about our next steps.
Okay.
Wrap up.
I can do that, and I'll do it very quickly. But before I do, thank you so much for your hard work. This was really a fascinating discussion and really thorough and thoughtful. And I can tell you've just spent a ton of time on this outside of these meetings. So thank you. But quickly, for next week, what do we got here? So this is on your agenda. Can you see that? This is on your agenda if you want to go back to it, but here we are on the 18th. Next, in 2 weeks, as what? Okay, as Allison mentioned, we're going to take a look at the survey and also the yes/no recommendation for the Oak Lodge Library to be located on the Concord property. So that's in 2 weeks. And we will try to get the surveys to you ahead of time. I have to say, we are working 24/7, and we'll just do the best we can on that. We also have a board policy session scheduled for July 14th. It'll be an excellent time to give the board an update of where we are on the yes/no recommendation, on the 3 alternatives that you've selected to go out to the public. And then we will be taking the public open house. We'll go live on July 6th, sometime on that day, 100% on the 7th. And that's what we're advertising. So take a look for that, but we will talk more about that later. That's my schedule update.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for your input tonight. It was really valuable to hear from each person. I think that was really helpful for each of us as the task force members. I'm sure for the design team, they appreciated that insight, that feedback as well. Appreciate your patience, the work on this, and look forward to seeing you all in a couple of weeks. Enjoy the warm weekend.
I hope so.
Hope so.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Take care,
bye, everybody.
folks. Thank you so much. Bye, Mark Elliott's cute dog.
I missed